couple of people at the immigration department, so...
You've got some fans there?
Yes, we do. And they let us by.
Frankie Lymon was one of the biggest stars in America before he had even turned 18. His voice helped spark a musical revolution, earned millions of dollars, and transformed him from a poor kid in Harlem into one of the most famous teenagers in the world almost overnight. But while the public saw a smiling young sensation living a dream, a tragedy was quietly unfolding behind the scenes. The very people entrusted with guiding his career would betray him, exploit him, and leave wounds that would follow him for the rest of his life. As the fame began to fade, Frankie found himself chasing something he could never get back, and with each passing year, he slipped further into a darkness that seemed impossible to escape. When his life finally came to an end, it happened under heartbreaking circumstances, far removed from the screaming fans, flashing cameras, and glamorous spotlight that had once followed him everywhere. How did one of the most beloved young stars of his generation end up there? And who was really responsible for the tragedy that became Frankie Lymon's life? The boy soprano who made millions, Franklin Joseph Lymon, was born on September 30th, 1942, in the Washington Heights neighborhood of New York City. His father, Howard Lymon, worked as a truck driver, a hard job that paid just enough to keep the family from starving. Howard also sang in a local gospel group called the Harlem Airs, which meant that music was always playing in the Lymon household. His mother, Josephine Lymon, worked as a domestic maid, cleaning other people's houses to bring in extra money for the family. The Lymons could barely afford enough food. They lived in a cramped Harlem tenement apartment, and every dollar that came in was spent before it arrived. Frankie learned to hustle early. He started working as a grocery store delivery boy at age 10, carrying heavy bags up flights of stairs for tips that were never quite enough. By age 12, according to documented historical industry interviews, he was supplementing his family's income in ways that were not legal. He ran errands for local gamblers and numbers runners. He did what he had to do to put food on the table, and he never complained about it. The streets of Harlem in the 1950s were not kind to children, and Frankie grew up fast. At age 12, he attended a talent show at Stitt Junior High School in Harlem. He was not planning to perform. He just wanted to watch. On stage that night was a local street corner vocal group called the Premiers, though they had also cycled through names like the Ermins and the Coupe de Villes. Frankie liked what he heard. He introduced himself to the lead singer, a boy named Herman Santiago, and asked if he could join the group as a first tenor. Santiago heard Frankie sing and said yes. The group had a new member, and music history was about to be made. In 1955, the Premiers were practicing their harmonies in the public hallway of a Harlem apartment building because none of them had a living room big enough to hold the whole group. As they sang, a man walked past and stopped to listen. His name was Richard Barrett, and he was the lead singer of a popular rhythm and blues group called the Valentines. Barrett was impressed by what he heard. The raw vocal blend of these teenage boys singing in a dirty hallway sounded better than some professional groups he had heard in recording studios. Barrett agreed to act as their mentor. He arranged an official tryout with an independent record executive named George Goldner, who owned G Records. A tenant named Emru Vance lived in the apartment building where the group's bass singer, Sherman Garnes, resided. Vance had recently gone through a difficult breakup, and his estranged girlfriend had left behind a collection of handwritten love letters. Vance gave the letters to the boys, hoping that they could use the text to write a song. Two members of the group, Jimmy Merchant and Herman Santiago, combed through the letters and found a phrase that caught their attention. The line asked why birds sing so gaily in the springtime as if they were in love. The phrase was romantic and a little sad, and it became the foundation of a new rhythm melody that the boys worked on for weeks. In September of 1955, the group arrived at G Records to audition for George Goldner. But there was a problem. Before we continue, I want to share something, and I'll be straight with you about what it is. This isn't about a supplement or a program that's going to transform your memory in 30 days. This is about a piece of research published in Science magazine in 2013 that most people have never seen. That explains what actually causes the brain to slow down and what actually addresses it. Go to brainresearchreport.com or find it linked in the description below. It's the kind of thing you'll want to share with someone you care about. All right, back to the video. The original lead singer, Herman Santiago, either arrived late or was suffering from throat trouble. The exact details have been disputed over the years, but the result was the same. Santiago could not sing. Frankie Lymon stepped up to the microphone, announced that he knew the lead vocal part because he had helped refine the melody, and started to sing. His voice was unlike anything Goldner had ever heard. It was a boy soprano, high and clear and pure, but it had a roughness around the edges that made it perfect for rock and roll. Goldner was stunned. He signed the group on the spot under the condition that Lymon remain the permanent lead singer. In December of 1955, the group entered Bell Sound Studios in New York City to record the track. The session producer, Jimmy Wright, suggested changing the group's name from the Premiers to the Teenagers. The name was designed to target the surging post-war demographic of young music consumers, teenagers who had money to spend and were looking for music that spoke to them. The name stuck. Released in January of 1956, Why Do Fools Fall in Love became an overnight sensation. It climbed to number 1 on the Billboard Rhythm and Blues chart and reached number 6 on the Billboard Pop chart. It crossed over to the United Kingdom, peaking at number 1 on the UK singles chart. The record sold more than 3 million physical copies globally during its initial run. A 13-year-old boy from Harlem had become America's first black teenage pop idol. He was the foundational icon of early rock and roll, a voice that defined an era. But behind the screaming fans and the hit records, the people who controlled Frankie's money were already stealing him blind. The exploitation that ruined his career. When George Goldner filed the official copyright papers for Why Do Fools Fall in Love in early 1956, he made a decision that would change the course of music history. He actively cut out the original authors of the song, Herman Santiago and Jimmy Merchant, the two members of the Teenagers who had actually written the lyrics and the melody. Goldner registered the songwriting credits exclusively under his own name and Frankie Lymon's name. This fraudulent filing allowed Goldner to illegally claim 50% of the mechanical songwriting royalties for a song he had not written. Frankie, who was only 13 years old, had helped refine the melody, but he had not written the song by himself. The law did not matter. Goldner had the lawyers, and the boys from Harlem did not. In 1957, the situation went from bad to worse. Goldner, who suffered from severe gambling debts, sold his stakes in G Records and Roulette Records to a man named Morris Levy. Levy was a notorious music industry tycoon with extensive ties to the Genovese crime family. He was not a record executive in the traditional sense. He was a mobster who used the music business as a front for his other operations. Levy immediately removed Goldner's name from the songwriting credits of Why Do Fools Fall in Love and substituted his own name. The goal was simple. Levy wanted to intercept all future royalty checks for a song that was still selling millions of copies every year. He did not care that he had not written the song. He had the power to take it, and he took it. To silence complaints and prevent future legal challenges from the other band members, management took advantage of the group's financial illiteracy. Herman Santiago and Jimmy Merchant were just teenagers. They did not have lawyers. They did not understand contracts. In 1956, management coerced them into signing a legal release form in exchange for a single flat cash payment of exactly $1,000. $1,000 for a song that had sold 3 million copies and counting. They signed away their rights to any future royalties, and the men who had stolen their song walked away with millions. The exploitation of Frankie Lymon was even more egregious. Because Frankie was a minor under the age of 21, New York state law dictated that his massive earnings had to be placed into a court-supervised trust fund. The money belonged to him, but it was supposed to be held in a protected account until he reached adulthood. Goldner and Levy completely bypassed this legal requirement. They lied to Frankie's uneducated parents, telling them that the money was accumulating safely in a corporate holding account. The parents believed the men in suits because they had no reason not to. The trust fund was never legally opened. The millions that Frankie earned from his recordings, his tours, and his songwriting credits were never set aside for him. The money was pocketed by Goldner and Levy or funneled into Levy's other shell businesses. Frankie would never see a dime of it. Recognizing that Frankie was the sole commercial engine of the brand, Levy and Goldner engineered a plan to split him from the group. During their 1957 European tour, management forced Frankie to perform solo tracks over pre-recorded backing tapes without his bandmates. The other members of the Teenagers were told to stand in the wings while Frankie sang alone under a spotlight. The intentional sabotage worked exactly as planned. The other members grew jealous and resentful. The infighting that followed was bitter and destructive. By September of 1957, Frankie formally quit the Teenagers. He was 15 years old, and he was on his own. The devastating impact of going solo was immediate. Stripped of the unique vocal backing blend of the Teenagers, Frankie's career instantly lost its magic. The group had been more than a backup band. They were an essential part of the sound, providing harmonies and energy that made Frankie's voice soar. Without them, his recordings sounded thin and empty. His subsequent solo records on Roulette Records, such as My Girl and Little Girl, failed to chart. The radio stations that had played Why Do Fools Fall in Love on repeat would not touch his new material. The fans who had screamed his name moved on to other singers. By the time he was 18 years old, Frankie Lymon was a has-been. Left without any creative support structure and locked out of his own financial earnings by Morris Livy, Frankie was completely broke, isolated, and professionally abandoned by his late teens. The boy who had made millions was now a teenager with no money and no future. The men who had stolen from him were living in mansions, driving expensive cars, and counting their profits. Frankie was living in his grandmother's apartment, trying to figure out how to pay for his next meal. Frankie would never recover what was stolen from him, and the rest of his short life would be defined by the consequences of their greed. The theft of his money was only part of the tragedy. The same men who had exploited his talent also made sure that his personal life was just as chaotic. Frankie's complicated love life, marked by multiple marriages and bitter legal battles, would add another layer of pain to a story that was already unbearably sad. Frankie's complicated love life. In 1956, at the absolute peak of his fame, the 14-year-old Lymon began a secret, intimate relationship with Zola Taylor, the famous female vocalist of the Platters. Taylor was 21 years old, a grown woman with an established career and a public reputation to protect. Because Taylor was several years older than Lymon, the relationship was kept hidden from the public eye. The handlers who managed both groups feared that the truth would destroy the clean adolescent image that had made both acts so profitable. The secret was kept, and the relationship continued in the shadows, known only to a small circle of insiders who had no interest in exposing it. In January of 1964, Lymon met a dancer named Elizabeth Waters in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Waters had a troubled past. She had a history of substance abuse and petty criminal charges, but Lymon was drawn to her anyway. They were married in a quick ceremony in Virginia in 1964, and Lymon moved into her home in Philadelphia. He was 21 years old, and he was desperate for the kind of stability that had been missing from his life since childhood. Shortly after the wedding, Elizabeth became pregnant. Lymon was overjoyed at the thought of becoming a father. He wanted a child more than anything, someone who would be his blood and his legacy. Elizabeth gave birth to a daughter, a baby girl they named Francine Lymon. But the infant was born with severe health complications that the doctors could not fix. The baby died in the hospital just 2 days after birth. Lymon was devastated. He had lost his father's legacy, his mother's stability, his career's earnings, and now his only child. The weight of that loss would stay with him for the rest of his short life. Unknown to Lymon at the time of the ceremony, Elizabeth Waters' prior divorce from her first husband had not been legally finalized by the courts. The paperwork had been filed, but the judge had not signed the final order. This administrative reality meant that her marriage to Frankie Lymon was bigamous and completely void under state law. Lymon lived his remaining years believing that he was legally married to Elizabeth, but the law said otherwise. In 1965, Lymon reconnected with his former lover, Zola Taylor. The two had not seen each other in years, but the old attraction was still there. Taylor later claimed in federal court that she and Lymon traveled across the border to Mexico and eloped in a private civil ceremony. She said that they exchanged vows, signed papers, and became husband and wife. However, no marriage certificate, license, or legal registration for this supposed marriage was ever found in Mexican or American public archives. Taylor's story was compelling, but she could not produce any evidence to back it up. In early 1967, while stationed at an Army base in Georgia, Lymon met an elementary school teacher named Emira Eagle. She was not a dancer or a singer. She was not a celebrity. She was a regular woman with a steady job and a stable life. Lymon fell in love with her, and they were officially and legally married at the Beulah Grove Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, on June 30th, 1967. Emira Eagle provided Lymon with the temporary domestic stability that had been missing from his entire life. She loved him, and she took care of him. For the final year of his life, Frankie Lymon had a real home with a real wife who wanted nothing from him except his love. In 1981, superstar Diana Ross recorded a massive cover version of "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" The song became a hit all over again, generating millions of dollars in back royalties for the people who owned the rights. That sudden fortune caused chaos. Elizabeth Waters, Zola Taylor, and Emira Eagle all filed claims in New York Surrogate's Court, each claiming to be Frankie Lymon's sole surviving legal widow and rightful heir to his estate. The three widows' legal war was bitter and ugly. Each woman produced witnesses, documents, and testimony to support her claim. The court had to untangle the mess that Lymon had left behind. The legal battle dragged on for years. In 1988, a lower court judge initially ruled in favor of Elizabeth Waters, accepting her claim that she had been Lymon's first legal wife. But in 1989, the New York Appellate Division completely overturned that decision. The higher court ruled that because Waters' first marriage was still active in 1964, her union with Lymon was invalid. Because Zola Taylor had no physical paperwork to prove her Mexican elopement, her claim was also rejected. Emira Eagle, who had the only valid marriage certificate from a recognized church and state authority, was declared the only lawful surviving spouse. She was granted sole ownership of Lymon's estate, finally putting an end to a legal fight that had lasted nearly a decade. The complicated love life of Frankie Lymon was a reflection of his complicated life in general. He was a man who never had a stable home, never had a reliable parent, never had anyone to teach him how to build a healthy relationship. He made mistakes, hurt people, and was hurt by others. But the true tragedy of Frankie Lymon's life was not his love life. It was the addiction that took hold of him in his final years and never let go. The downfall of Frankie Lymon. In 1957, at age 15, Lymon hit puberty. His vocal cords thickened naturally, as every boys do when they become men. His signature boy-soprano voice, the high and clear sound that had made him a star, dropped into a mature baritone tenor tone. He could not help it. No one can help puberty. But the audiences who had viewed him as a cute child novelty act rejected his adult voice. They did not want to hear a man sing the songs that a boy had made famous. His live shows began drawing empty rooms. The promoters who had once fought to book him stopped returning his calls. Depressed by his failing career, the loss of his childhood wealth, and the constant exploitation by adult handlers, Lymon looked for an escape. He was 15 years old, still a child by any measure, but he had already been cheated out of millions, abandoned by his bandmates, and discarded by the industry that had made him. Older associates in the Harlem jazz scene introduced him to illicit substances. He rapidly developed a severe physical addiction that was about to ruin his life. On July 19, 1957, Lymon performed live on Alan Freed's ABC televised musical variety show, The Big Beat. The performance started well enough. Lymon sang his song, and the audience applauded. But then something happened that would destroy whatever was left of his career. While singing, Lymon began dancing on camera with a white teenage girl from the studio audience. The sight of a black youth dancing with a white girl on national television triggered instant fury from segregationist Southern television affiliates. The network switchboards lit up with complaints. The immense corporate backlash forced ABC to cancel the entire show permanently. Lymon did not mean to cause a scandal. He was just a teenager having fun. But the racist policies of the era meant that his innocent dance was seen as a threat, and he paid the price. As his addiction worsened, Lymon became highly unreliable. He would book recording sessions and then fail to show up. He would agree to perform at clubs and then disappear for days. Major record labels like Columbia Records and 20th Century Fox Records signed him for potential comeback attempts, hoping that they could recapture the magic of his teenage years. But each time, Lymon failed to appear for scheduled recording sessions or public appearances because he was too intoxicated to function. The labels canceled his contracts, the opportunities dried up, and the money stopped coming. To fund his expensive addiction, Lymon turned to street-level crime. Throughout the early to mid-1960s, he was arrested multiple times in New York, Los Angeles, and Sacramento. His charges included grand larceny, possession of illicit substances, and breaking into structures to steal electronics to pawn for money. In June of 1966, following a major arrest in New York, a judge gave Lymon a choice. He could face a lengthy prison sentence, or he could enlist in the armed forces. Lymon chose the military and was drafted into the United States Army. He was stationed at Fort Gordon in Georgia, far from the streets of Harlem. The hope was that the structure and discipline of military life would help him get clean. Lymon's military career was a disaster. Desperately needing cash to feed his addiction, he was repeatedly absent without official leave. He snuck off the Georgia military installation to perform low-paying gigs at small jazz lounges and bars across the Deep South. The pay was terrible, but it was enough to feed his addiction. The Army quickly lost patience with him. They court-martialed him for his repeated absences and terminated his service, issuing him a dishonorable discharge. He was 24 years old, and he had nothing left. The downfall of Frankie Lymon was complete. He had gone from the top of the world to the bottom of the gutter in less than a decade. The people who had stolen his money were living comfortably. The people who had exploited his talent had moved on to their next victims. Frankie was alone, addicted, and broke. The end was coming, and it was not going to be peaceful. The tragic death of Frankie Lymon. In February of 1968, Frankie's manager, Julie Williams, secured a deal with Roulette Records in New York City. The label agreed to give Frankie one final studio session to cut a comeback record. It was his last chance. If the session went well, he might get a contract. If the record sold, he might get back on the radio. If enough people heard him, he might escape the cycle of addiction and poverty that had trapped him for a decade. The pressure was enormous. Frankie traveled from Georgia to New York for the session. He stayed at his grandmother's apartment in Harlem, the same neighborhood where he had grown up and had first learned to sing. Stressed by his career decline and terrified that his adult voice would fail him in the studio the next day, Frankie went out and purchased a batch of illicit substances. On the night before his scheduled recording session, Frankie locked himself inside his grandmother's bathroom to feed his addiction. He did not want his grandmother to see what he was doing. However, the illicit substance caused a fatal cardiac arrest, a sudden stopping of the heart. On the morning of February 27, 1968, his grandmother knocked on the bathroom door, and there was no answer. She broke down the locked door and found Frankie dead, slumped over on the floor. He was wearing a basic undershirt. His pockets were completely empty. The boy who had sold 3 million records, who had been America's first black teenage pop idol, who had performed at the London Palladium and starred in Hollywood movies, died in his grandmother's bathroom with nothing to his name. When the news of Frankie's death hit the media, the music industry reacted with total indifference. No executives from G Records, Roulette Records, or Columbia Records offered any financial support for his burial. The men who had stolen his royalties did not send flowers or attend the funeral. His former bandmates from the teenagers, still harboring deep bitterness over the 1957 split and the financial ruin that followed, did not show up. The millions of fans who had bought his records a decade earlier had moved on to new stars. They paid no attention to the news that Frankie Lymon was dead. Frankie's body was moved to St. Raymond Cemetery in the Bronx, New York, because his estate was entirely broke and no music company offered to fund a monument. He was buried in a cheap, basic casket in a completely unmarked grave. For nearly 20 years, his final resting place remained an anonymous, empty plot of grass, entirely forgotten by the public. However, in 1985, a man named Ronnie Italiano, who ran a doo-wop fan organization called the United in Group Harmony Association, discovered that Frankie Lymon was buried in an unmarked grave. He was deeply disturbed by this. He organized a series of benefit concerts featuring vintage 1950s artists, and the shows raised $3,000 to custom design a proper granite headstone for Frankie. The fans had stepped in where the industry had refused to act. But there was a problem. Amira Eagle, Frankie's third wife, was still fighting the legal battle to be recognized as his sole surviving widow. She learned about the fan-led movement and realized that allowing an outside group to place a headstone could weaken her legal standing in the active multi-million-dollar estate trial. To assert her legal authority as the official widow, Eagle rushed to purchase her own headstone and had it installed at St. Raymond's Cemetery. She legally blocked the fans from installing theirs. Because Amira's stone blocked them, the custom headstone purchased by the fans had nowhere to go. It sat on display in the front window of a music store in New Jersey called Clifton Music until the shop closed in 2012. After that, it was stored in a fan's residential backyard garden in New Jersey for years. Eventually, it was permanently transferred to the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame in 2021. In December of 1992, the surviving Teenagers members, Herman Santiago and Jimmy Merchant, won a historic federal lawsuit against EMI Music Publishing. The court recognized the 1956 fraud, restored their songwriting credits, and awarded them $4 million in back royalties. Santiago, who had been struggling with extreme poverty and living out of his car, became an instant millionaire, but the victory was short-lived. In 1996, the U.S. Court of Appeals completely overturned the ruling on an aggressive technicality. The court said that Santiago and Merchant had waited too many decades to file their original claim. Their names were stripped from the copyrights. The millions were clawed back. The songwriting rights were returned permanently to the estates of Morris Levy, the mobster who had stolen them in the first place. The men who had cheated Frankie won in the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.